Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji.
Welcome back to another episode of The Deconstructed Woman. Today we're going to start off by an analogy that Alyssa and I found on Facebook. We're going to read it and then we'll discuss it. You are holding a cup of coffee when someone comes along and bumps into you or shakes your arm, making you spill your coffee everywhere. Why did you spill the coffee? Because someone bumped into me. Wrong answer. You spilled the coffee because there was coffee in your cup. Had there been tea in your cup, you would have spilled tea. Whatever is inside the cup is what will spill out.
Therefore, when life comes along and shakes you, which will happen, whatever's inside you will come out. It's easy to fake it until you get rattled. So we have to ask ourselves, what's in my cup? When life gets tough, what spills over? Joy, gratitude, peace, and humility? Anger, bitterness, victim mentality, and quitting tendencies? Life provides the cup. You choose how to fill it. Today, let's work towards filling our cups with gratitude, forgiveness, joy, words of affirmation, resilience, positivity, and kindness, gentleness, and love for others.
So when I saw this last weekend, I shared it with a couple people who also thought that it really resonated with them. Alyssa, what grabs your attention the most when you read this for the first time?
For me, I think that we've talked on previous podcasts about, like I've always said, I'm a yeller and I yell a lot. And I think that, my strongest emotion a lot of times is anger. And I find that I go to anger very quickly in a lot of circumstances. And really, I'm aware of the fact that anger is just the tip of the iceberg, as a lot of people say. It's usually fueled by anxiety or fear, some other feeling, but anger is what spills out for me. And so when I saw this, I was like, oh, that really, it makes a lot of sense that, that's what's underneath everything. And so I've been a lot of times, the conversations that we had, what I'm trying to do is change or morph that anger into calmness, into peace, to be able to say, when a lot of that's taking mind shifts, changes for me to look at things a little bit differently, to understand various ways of looking at the same situation. But I think for me, I don't know if other people have that, but I think that angerness and bitterness is what spills out for me. But that's something that I'm actively trying to change so that it's not the first go to. It's a very instinctual thing. It's not something I think about. I just had a conversation with my husband the other day where he was like, why is your go to yell? And I was like, I don't love it. It doesn't feel good for me. It doesn't feel good for everyone else, but that's what comes out. Maybe because I don't feel heard. And so again, it's one of those things where I have a lot of those negative emotions and I definitely I want joy and happiness to spill out. But that seems like it's a process and not one that I have accomplished yet, but I find myself getting closer. So those are my first impressions of it.
My first impressions after reading this was like, oh, what a lovely analogy, and made me think about it for a while. And I do think that it would be hard if somebody bumped into you and something happened that your first thought would be, oh, I'm so grateful for this bumped opportunity. Like, I'm not on one hand, yeah, I get the message and I feel like it really is quite profound and it's fantastic. But then, because when you were talking, I thought, oh, here you're being all vulnerable and talking about real emotion. And I was like, oh, what a wonderful analogy. It's so fantastic. And you're being really real. And then as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, my instinct is always to apologize, whether I'm at fault or not. Typically, I'm not, but I always like lead with I'm sorry. And I know that there have been times where that has gotten under people's skin. That because especially my family members, it's always, why are you sorry? You didn't do anything. Like, and it's almost made me feel like, oh, I haven't done anything wrong, but that's a polite way to handle that situation. And I think that I was raised to always be super, super polite and, be the person who was willing to say, I'm sorry, probably also because I'm the peacekeeper in my house. And so when you were talking, Alyssa, I was thinking if I was to really think about what would actually happen, I would say that I probably would apologize. But looking at not what our initial instinct might be, when you look at this, what do you think is the message? That how did the message strike you looking at it from its sort of ideal state? What did you get out of what did that teach you or make you think about?
I think the message that I see from this is that when I look at those individuals who I want to be more like, I do see love and generosity and the things that were listed there, consideration. I see those things spilling out of them, if you will. And so that made me want to be more like that, to try to emulate that to others. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how people get there. I imagine that life circumstances maybe help because we've talked about like my phase of life is very busy and I think some part of it is like I said that anger is fueled by anxiety. I just have a lot of anxieties in my current state with small kids and trying to keep them alive. So for me it's okay, how do I get there? How do I express that? So that's what people see outwardly. And I think that it's reflecting back on what's inside. So I think that a lot of times we put up a facade. We say we go about feeling happy, or not that we show that we're happy or we look happy on the outside, but like underneath that, maybe anxiety, sadness, depression, whatever it is. It takes me back to that episode where we were talking about you never really know what's going on for other people. And under the surface, some people might be really struggling and we don't know. And it's so hard, especially when it hits close to home, to see that for what it's worth. So I think that those are some of the things that came up for me. But the idea that if you're like it talks about, I think that it said something like you can fake it. But really, the reality is that even if you're faking it, you're going to have those moments where when it gets too much, whatever comes out is going to come out. And I think that, in some ways, for some people, like that sadness is going to come out. I wear my emotions on my sleeve. So for me, I don't know how that is for some people because I'm not very good at lying. I'm horrible at poker and I wear my emotions on my sleeve. I tell you how it is. If I'm angry, you know I'm angry. If I'm upset, you know I'm upset. It's very clear to others how I'm feeling. But I know that's not true for a lot of people. A lot of people don't show their true emotions, they stuff them down. So I guess a lot of thoughts came out initially, but those are some of the ones that hit me the hardest.
Yeah, I think a lot of it also depends on when you talk about what stage of life you're in. I would even say what is happening in the moment, right? If you're rushing from work to go pick up the kids from daycare, and then you're already thinking about what's going to be for dinner and what am I going to make for dinner, and then somebody bumps into your car or something, and it's nothing major, but it's just a slight jog into reality of, oh my gosh, and now you're going to be late. Your reaction is going to be very much about what is going on in that moment, right? Because now are you going to be late to pick up your kids? Is your daycare provider going to be patient with you? They're ready to get on with their evening schedule. So I think a lot of it depends on the setting and what's going on. I don't think there's ever a good time to get bumped into coffee or get into a small altercation or with cars or something in a parking lot. But I think if you're rushing somewhere, and I think as a young mom, you're always like trying to go from one place to another. There's never enough time to get everything done. And so, what the reaction is really based on the heat of the moment. In terms of how I have found to be more grateful is really, and I may have talked about this before, I feel like I do talk about it to other people, is I started, a colleague of mine from one of the worst jobs I ever had in my career, which was in 2016, 2017, gave me a gratitude journal in 2017. And I have been keeping one since that day when she gave it to me as a present. And she knew I was really struggling. She knew I needed to get out of there, but I didn't know what to do and how to do it and things like that. And so I started a gratitude journal, and it has been life changing for me. And there is an exercise that is also recommended that when you're not in a good place or you can't see the bright side, that you start talking about what you are grateful for in the moment. And it is quite, I don't know the word, it's phenomenal. As you start talking about, as you start listing in your head everything you're grateful for, inadvertently, you will start feeling better because now you're just shifting that emotion from a place of darkness to some place that is more joyful and more accepting, and realizing that you do have a lot of great things and you are grateful for what you have. And so it is something that I have found that it will almost instantaneously change. And sometimes, most of the times when I'm starting that exercise, I'm starting with really silly things like I have a job, I have a car, it's sunny outside, very superficial things. And as I start reciting everything that I'm grateful for, then it starts to get into like my family and my life and the gifts that I have and all of that. And you cannot go through that litany of a recital of everything that you're grateful for without it changing your feelings in some way. I think the trick of it is that when you're caught off guard, how do you instantaneously start that in a way that it can change your mood? Or is that something you practice as you're going to a situation? If you are, as you are, Alyssa, a young mom rushing from work to childcare to home, is there a way to insert some of that maybe at a certain time frame, which makes sense when you have a moment of peace before the world blows up with the kids in the car? I don't know. What do you think about? I think we may have talked about this before, but any thoughts about that?
Well, I think it goes back to what I had mentioned is that mindset. And I think that I can't remember if I mentioned on the last podcast episode, but I started reading Good Inside by Becky Thompson, I think it is. No, Becky Kennedy. So I'm almost done with the book. But the premise of the book is that everybody's good inside. And I think that's such an interesting thing. But that helps me with my kids when I'm thinking about they're acting out. I'm like, they're okay, they're good kids. They're just having a hard time. And that mentality, that's just slight difference in words that I'm saying to myself has made all the difference in me not misinterpreting their behaviors. And so when my 2-year old is throwing her food during a meal all over the kitchen, for me to be like, she's good inside, she's just probably getting tired, or she's probably overstimulated, or she's done eating, or whatever. It's just a mind shift. And so I respond much differently. And so I also carry that into just my daily interactions. Like when somebody cuts me off, I think that I have no idea what's going on for that person, but maybe they're struggling right now. Maybe they're having a hard time. So just let them get into the lane. I don't need to take that negativity or that moment and carry it with me. I'm also the kind of person that doesn't hold grudges. It's a blessing and a curse because I something happens and I'll be really upset in the moment and again have like my emotions on my sleeve, have my reaction. But then the next day I wake up and it's gone for me, which is great because I don't hold on to it, but also I don't remember that. And so if the person does it again, it may come back to me or it may not. So again, but for me, it's very easy to let go of those things. But it also in that moment, I don't want to carry that negativity when I'm already, like I said, underneath the surface. There's a lot of anger right at the tip of the iceberg. And so I don't want to add to that. And so when people cut me off or people push me in the supermarket, I just think in my head, that person's probably having some sort of day. They're having their own thing and I leave it there. And so I think about that. It helps me in a lot of different situations. Sometimes I'm walking down the hall and work and I hear people whispering and I think to myself, my previous response in my head was I must have done something wrong, or maybe they're talking about me, similar to what you're saying about like the apologizing. But then I learned, you know what? If they have something, I trust that they'll tell me. And so it's okay. And so again, changing that mental state so that I'm not carrying that because I think that adds to it. So not only do you have whatever is in your cup that might spill out, but what are you adding to that cup? I think that makes a difference too. That if you're adding more anxieties or more anger through your interactions with people day to day, I think that adds up and it can also then spill out even more. And so I try to not hold on to those things so that even if anger still comes out, which let me just be clear, every day it does. but even though it does, it's less. And I'm trying to like spill out the anger so I can fill it up with love. That's what I'm trying to do.
So it's interesting. I lost the analogy. So I was Google searching it really quickly while you were talking. And there's many people who've actually responded to this analogy on their own blogs and stuff like that. One of them that I read said, you have to consider the fact that if coffee does spill on you, you're not the only person being burned. Sometimes coffee, like a hot coffee, will also burn other people. So, one of the reflections that this writer was talking about was, so if things spill out of you, how does it hurt the other people? So, what you were talking about, Alyssa, in terms of your kids and trying to see the goodness in them so that you can mitigate some of the impact on them, because that's not your true mothering, right? That's like at a point of stress or anxiety, the things that you've talked about. So, I thought that to be very interesting. Another writer says, what do you think is in your cup when it's balanced? If you got bumped into, what do you think would spill over if you were coming from a place of balance? So I guess that's an interesting thought in the sense of what do we look like when we're on an even keel? And so what would that be in contrast to what we think happens when we're not in balance? Um, that's, I don't know. I need to ponder that for a moment. Do you have an immediate answer, Alyssa? What, if you were completely in balance, what would be, what would spill out of you?
I don't think I think maybe I guess the initial thing is like I said, I'm trying to get my whole cup full of all of those positive feelings. But I think that's maybe too naive in that we're going to have negative feelings. We're going to have negative experiences. So I think that's what I don't know if I'm misinterpreting that, but that's what it's saying is like when you're balanced, or I think that it's probably speaking to resiliency that even in light of negative things spilling out or positive things, that you're able to recalibrate in some ways. And so that's what I'm hearing through that is that if you can recalibrate, if you can shift yourself to be able to say, okay, this was a rough situation. This was I didn't maybe respond the best way, but I'm going to make amends, or I'm going to repair whatever it is. Like maybe that's how you balance yourself back, and you're able to do that because you have some of that gratitude and that joy and that love there. So I think if you're completely empty and devoid of those positive feelings, it's going to be much harder to do that. And so I think the balance is being able to recalibrate is what I hear through that, and being able to say this was a rough situation. It was hard for me, but I'm going to come back from it.
Yeah, as I think about it, if I'm completely balanced, that means that it is about resiliency. It's also about just not getting caught up in the moment. So, if I'm completely balanced and I'm on a day off and I'm just hanging out with a girlfriend having a cup of coffee and somebody bumps into me, most likely I would just be like, oh, things happen. You know what? That person is embarrassed. I'm embarrassed. We're just not going to make a big deal out of it. We're just going to continue going on our individual ways. Now, obviously, if the coffee spilled on me and I'm on my way to work and then I'm thinking about having to go back to change and I might be running late to a meeting, that would be a whole different experience. I think that once again, it goes back to the situation. But I do think that if I was in complete balance, I wouldn't let it get to me. I would just take care of business, what I need to do, and just not make the other person feel bad, not feel like I'm an eyesore and this is all about me or whatever. It would just be like, okay, this person didn't intentionally mean to do this. We were both at the wrong place at the wrong time. And so we just need to move on. I think that would be the most I could come up with if I was feeling like I was grounded and not coming from a place of anxiety and I had everything was going the way it was supposed to. I think I would just be like, okay, this is not going to ruin my day. It's not going to ruin my life. This is just a moment in time. And we both just need to move on. Is I think the best I could expect in a situation like that, whether that's good or bad, that's what I think I would come up with. Any
Yeah,
thoughts?
I was gonna jump in because that really speaks to me a lot, because I think that I have a lot of situations where I respond very quickly. I think I don't have like I'm not hyperactive, but a lot of times I'm very like knee jerk reaction. Like something happens, I'm like, oh, I gotta respond this way or what. And again, it's not something I think through. I'm now trying to put more of a pause. But a lot of times, I mean, I loved how you described it because I'm like, oh, I wish I was more like that. Where, people like that, usually like somebody knocking to somebody, they're like, oh, no problem. Don't worry about it. But these things happen. That's a person who is not super anxious or angry or whatever, or have a lot of bitterness. Like they have that balance. And I wish that I was more like that, especially the people closest to me that, when things happen, I could be able to say, oh, you know, these things happen. It's okay. I don't know if that's like, it's hard for me because I mean, I've said it before, I'm such an anxious kind of tightly wound individual that it's really hard for me to respond in that way in the moment. And I think that it goes back to we had somebody talking about meditation and putting that pause in. And if you are this, I'm just putting in a plug in because if this is the first time you're coming across our podcast, welcome. But we've talked about a lot of these things from self care to meditation to all of these ways to get here and I'm trying to implement those. And it's again a work in progress, but it just makes me reflect back on all of the things that we've talked about because these are really good opportunities for us to put that in so that we can be that kind of person. I think that's the kind of person I want to be. I would love to be able to say, oh, that's an unfortunate thing, but it's okay. It didn't ruin my day. I'm able to continue through but a lot of times, very small things will set me off and put me in a tailspin very quickly. And so I'm easily able to get out of that in maybe 15 to 20 minutes. But during that 15 to 20-minute increment, it's pretty much like a twister storm in my life. That's something that hopefully for some people they can relate to me, but that's what I'd like to be.
I do. I think you raised a good point there too, which is about how we treat the people closest to us versus strangers. And I don't know what it is about the way we're socialized that we are actually kinder to strangers than we are to our loved ones. But I think that's a reality for most of us. For whatever reason, we are on our best behavior, more likely to give somebody else a break that we have no relationship with versus people we see all day long every day. And I hate to say it because I did the same thing. It feels, and they say that about mothers too, like our kids are harder on us because we are their mothers, or they know that they're safe with us. So they can be the most unpleasant part of themselves when they're not happy or whatever. But I do feel like we do that as well. I think that we can let our burdens down. We can be ourselves in our own four walls in our home. And so I feel like the people that surround us all day long might actually get the brunt of that just because we are more comfortable in our own space than we are out there in public. And I do feel like that is something now that I look back at it and say in hindsight that it should have been the opposite. I wish that I had more grace at home than gave myself permission to be rough because our families also depend on us to we're shaping them, right? We're shaping our kids and role modeling and things like that. And I'm not saying that any one of us does this on purpose. We all do it inadvertently because we're tired and we're exhausted and we're still running and we're still trying to get things done. But I do, if I could put a plug out there to be kinder inside our house and outside our house, because strangers are really less important in the big scheme of things because you will never see them again and yet, the most important people in our lives, we tend to be more lax with. And so that's definitely something that I think is a wise word to share with other people that I wouldn't want anybody to wait 10, 15 years to work on that and then be in the position that I'm in that I say, yeah, that was probably a mistake that I should have done better on because it's not good for anybody, especially the people that you love the most. So that's a very critical factor that you raised, Alyssa, and very smart that you're thinking about that already. Definitely.
I'm over here laughing because I'm like, yeah, it's so hard because like you said, those are the people we feel safest with. Our family, we can we can feel all the feelings, but I think that we also need to make sure that that our cups are spilling out for love and gratitude and happiness and joy for our families. And again, that's something that I'm working on each day, trying to, especially with little kids, I really want to make sure that that they know that they're loved. And I think they do. Sometimes I get like a glimpse where I'm like, oh, yeah, they got the message. We've talked about end of life things and how that will look and what our legacy, what we want it to be. And I think that's definitely part of it as well. I think those are my last couple of thoughts. I don't know, Joji, if you have any more, but I think that surprisingly, out of brief couple paragraph analogy, we had a whole discussion. So that's how it goes here.
Yeah, I think that it really did strike a chord with both of us. And so it led to a conversation that went in many different directions. And we definitely want to hear from our listeners and find out what impact that this analogy made for you. Each one of us is different, has a different life experience, and it's going to sit differently with each of us. And we, Alyssa Marie and I, are very interested to hear your reaction to this analogy, how it struck you, what our comments may have made you think about, or if you have comments that we didn't cover that you want to add, please reach out to us through the deconstructed woman at gmail.com or through our Facebook page. There's an active community on there. We'd love to hear from you there and reach out to us even through the platform if you'd like. Thank you for listening. As always, we'd love to hear from you and keep coming back. Please subscribe if you're not a subscriber and share this podcast with all your friends and family because we really would like to make a difference for all the people that can hear us. Goodbye for now. Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.